My name's Alan Long, Ward 4 City Council member, position 2. We'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. We want to get started off with a round of introductions. I've already told you who I am. We'll go this way, I guess.
Andrew Miles, citizen at large.
Joanna Pollock, citizen at large, Ward 2.
Peter Niergarten, Sustainability Director for the City of Fayetteville and Staff Liaison to the Environmental Action Committee.
Aubrey Shepard, what'd you say, citizen at large? I'm a citizen of age.
Kyle Smith, citizen for Ward 4.
Garnet Wise, I'm the industrial representative, I believe.
Rob Moore, citizen at large.
Richard Russell, Ward 1, citizen at large.
All right. Thank you all for being here. We also have Blake Pennington.
Blake Pennington, Assistant City Attorney.
Jeremy Page, Development Services Director.
Joe Neal, private citizen. Rural
Thank you all for being here and joining us. We appreciate it. Okay. So everyone has a copy of the agenda, or well, there's a copy here, but everyone's seen a copy before the meeting, I guess. Any questions about the agenda before we approve it? Everyone good with what we have on the agenda for today?
Yes.
So we'll start off just going through some of our old business. We talked about the rezoning last time on Highway 112 off Truckers Drive, the rezoning that the City Council forwarded to us. We had a lot of discussion last time. Joe gave a great presentation on the wildlife that's there, a lot about some of the wonderful species of birds that we have in Fayetteville, and some that we've lost and some that we have an opportunity to keep. And we talked a lot about potential new types of zoning classifications and maybe some ways that we could talk about forming a new zoning classification going forward. I asked Blake to join us today from the City Attorney's Office to kind of give us just a brief overview of what the zoning classifications can be and how those can be developed, but more specifically on this project, what it should be that we're looking at, because when you look at zoning, there are certain things we can do and certain things we can't do in particular cases. And so I just wanted Blake to be able to speak to some of those questions. And then Jeremy, more specifically, in the areas of different types of zoning classifications that could be created and the best use for this individual area in conjunction with some of the concerns that we've heard on the board. So, Blake, do you mind just kind of giving us a rundown of what this zoning is and compared to what the request is, or Jeremy, whoever kind of wants to
I think planning
on that.
and development is probably in the best position to talk about that, because under the UDC, they are the official interpreters of that code.
Right.
I mean, we're here to provide advice and whatnot, but they are the official interpreters. I think they're best positioned to do that.
I'll be happy to start.
Sorry.
Jump in.
Yes, whoever wanted to take that one.
I think there was also some questions on, there's a staff recommendation. I'll go ahead and show the map here of the parcel that we're talking about. A staff recommendation for community services zoning, and there were some questions on whether or not there were other zonings that were potentially considered for the 59-acre parcel. So I think Jeremy's probably the best person to address those concerns. He does have some family obligations, though, this evening that he needs to take care of, and so I was hoping to be out of here by around 6 o'clock. So if you guys could be formulating your questions for him so we could get those questions taken care of early after his presentation, that'd be most helpful for his family obligations.
So just a quick overview of both. I may jump around, but kind of both the obligations, I guess, of a city related to zoning by state statute, but also this particular project. So by state statute, the state gives cities a right to create zoning and land use restrictions. Cities of certain classes can do certain things, and since we're considered a larger city, over 50,000 people, so we're able to create what's called a planning commission. Planning commission, by statute, is given the authority to review our land use plan and formulate a land use plan, including zoning, and recommend that to the city council. So that's really the body that's given the statute to get to recommendations for specific zoning items to the city council, who then makes a legislative decision about a zoning action. So that's what we have here. We have every piece of property within the city is zoned something, and essentially zoning is a land use determination. You have certain classifications. I think we have something like 26 or 28 zoning classifications throughout the city, ranging from agricultural to single-family residential, multifamily residential, some office, strictly commercial uses. So like the red you see on the right of the map is considered C2. That's your highway commercial, what basically a lot of the commercial property in the city is zoned, has been since the 1970s. And then we have some newer zoning classifications, which are mixed-use zonings. They're intended to evoke a specific form rather than just look at uses. And so the purple there you see is community services. That's one of the such zones, which is a mixed-use zone in which you could have single-family residential, multifamily, or commercial, or all of them mixed together. And the variety and intensity and density of those zones vary by the different zone classification. So the way this process works, generally as a property owner comes to the city and requests a zoning change, maybe they want to do something with their property, or maybe they're speculatively just want to zone the property to sell it for a higher value, or they want to do something very specific, like build a home, and they don't have enough property in that zone to do so. So normally that's an application process. It goes to staff. We make a recommendation to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission makes a recommendation to the council, who makes a final decision. We base our recommendation, both staff, Planning Commission, and the City Council, on a number of factors: traffic generation, compatibility with other zones around it. There's a list of 12, I think, criteria that courts have decided. I think there are about 12, roughly, that courts have decided are appropriate for considering a zoning. That's kind of what Alan was discussing. There's certain things even our elected officials can and cannot consider in a zoning action. But one of the biggest tools that we use is what's called our city plan document. It's a land use plan document that we update every 5 years. We look at a variety of factors like where housing is located, density, where commercial services should be located to serve neighborhoods and surrounding residences. We look at environmental factors, the Enduring Green Network, our transportation system, both bike, ped, and vehicular. So a number of factors goes into a land use map that is kind of broad brush strokes of what areas might develop as. And so those are then used to help formulate a recommendation for a zoning. This particular area is, for instance, is a city neighborhood area, if I remember correctly.
Yep, you're correct.
Which has a wide variety of land uses that could occur within that area. Not nearly as intense. Well, yeah, there you go. So the blue is city neighborhood. The magenta color is urban thoroughfare, I think. And it's more of a higher intensity, usually along the interstate type of use. So the intensity varies, and then the yellow there is residential. So you can kind of see the variety of land uses. This was adopted by the City Council about 4 years ago as the land use document that they utilize as, again, as one of their tools to make recommendations on zoning. This particular piece of property, to get more specifically, was brought to our attention because it was zoned as a planned zoning district, which is essentially when a property owner wants to do something with their land, but there's really not one of the 26 classifications that fits what they want to do, believe it or not. So they created a custom zoning district, which, thanks to here, this is what was originally planned to be developed. Pretty high intensity, actually, development with 850,000 square feet of commercial space, 1,800 dwelling units. There's a lot of stuff going on in that property when it was approved by the council, and so this is a legislative decision as well. It was a rezoning for this specific project, so they had to build the buildings where they were, the parking lots where they were, everything in that nature. With the recession, this project fell by the wayside. Two banks took over the property, and it was divided into two pieces. Several parcels of which now have been rezoned, and the 60, I think, acres that we're looking at currently is what's essentially what the remainder of that property is.
Can I ask a quick question?
You bet.
So when they rezoned it several years back for the development, that was, that had an expiration date on it, is that
It
right?
does, so we don't have expirations on PVDs like that any longer, but, they used to have a development plan associated with it, and they had to build that development plan out within a certain number of years. We recognized, through probably a dozen or more PVDs that we've had to bring back to council because they're expired, that it's not the best way to approach that, because, as you all know, the, economics can change and projects may or may not, happen. So now we look at a zoning, determine if it's appropriate, you have the zoning rights, and you still have to, if you develop this 20 years later, you're gonna meet the building codes and development codes 20 years later, not the one, you don't get to grandfather all those rights in, so,
So this particular, my guess is more than one parcel, when it expired, it just defaulted back to whatever it was before?
No,
or
that's,
what?
and that's the challenge, the way the ordinance was written, and the way, zoning works is that you can't just have a default to go back. It's a legislative decision, it's like a bill that the
Okay.
General Assembly passes, so they have to make another action, the council actually has to
Okay.
pass another ordinance to zone it to something. So right now, it's sort of in limbo.
Okay.
It's zoned planned zoning district, but there are no development rights associated with that, which is not a good legal place to be in for the city or for a property owner. And so we're really trying to clean our zoning map up and bring all those back to the city council. Sometimes we recommend it going back to what it was, sometimes, we look at, because the future land use map, shows that that's what it should be. Sometimes we make another recommendation. In this particular case, we felt community services was a good recommendation for this site.
Jeremy,
Yes, ma'am?
what are some of the reasons for custom zoning, and how often do you see that?
Normally, it's when, and we try to encourage it only when, there's sort of two major factors. One, there's a surrounding neighborhood very concerned with that property, the compatibility of whatever uses there are, so they really get to see the level of detail of the project, much more so than when you're just have a blanket zone. The second reason is when, as I mentioned before, you have a project that simply doesn't fit any one of our zone classifications. A lot of times maybe that's the size of the lot or the mixture of uses. We used to have a lot more planned zoning districts because we didn't have these mixed-use zones available for use. And so now we've created a handful, so there are a lot more options out there for someone to utilize the zones that we already created. It's a lot more manageable too, as opposed to having just a plethora of custom zoning districts out there, all with their own sets of rules and regulations.
Would this one have fit under one of the new mixed-use categories?
That's what it's recommended at currently. So the community services zone, that CS zone that you're seeing there, that was one of the mixed-use zones that we have at our disposal, and staff's recommending to the council to consider.
Would that prior custom, though, would it have been one of the current mixed-use zones?
It might have been, have to look into the project in really great detail. That one actually had, that's another thing about planned zoning districts, it had about 8 different custom zones in one, so there were all of these layers of things going on with the project.
Okay.
Can zoned planning districts only be used with a specific plan? So do you have to have a developer, you couldn't use it for the city to set limits on what could be done with land, you couldn't build your own one?
Correct, yeah, it has a development plan that actually comes forward.
Got it.
Whether it's conceptual or detailed, but there's some level of development plan, that's correct.
Are you aware of any current developers or management systems that are actually actively inquiring about the property or? Okay.
Yeah, the only thing, we've been in touch with the bank who owns the property, they obviously want to see it zoned something. It's hard to market a property when you can't do anything on it.
Yeah.
And, from our perspective as staff, we're not, we're not beholden to this specific zoning
Right.
district or even the boundaries of the zoning district. It was a recommendation because the council's adopted policy that this is a city neighborhood area, taking into account all those factors, the Enduring Green Network, the transportation plan. As you all know, Van Ash is being extended and widened from Gregg Avenue to 112, so we expect this will be a major commercial highway corridor in the near future. That project finishes up this summer, so a lot more, not more transportation issues within this area that we anticipate in the next few years.
Right.
Could we look back at the previous design that was associated with the PZD? I'm interested in how the undeveloped spaces were recognized and established. Do you have any sense of that?
A little. It's been a while. It's 2006 maybe, I think this was approved. So you can, you may have talked about this at the last meeting, I think you did, if I remember the video correctly, but there's some areas of delineated wetlands on the site. And in some of those areas, they tried to stay out of those, but so you can see the pond on the very top, yeah, there you go. So the wetland kind of goes south of there, so obviously they didn't, they were mitigating somehow the wetlands in that particular case.
If we were just to look at the green, the contiguous green and blue areas that were part of this plan, would those be land use? Is that considered land use?
Yes, so the whole property would be zoned, so if this, let's just say this were all zoned, this could all still be zoned community services, or all could be zoned single-family residential, and within that zone, you have pockets of preserved property. So in this particular one, this project was approved with those sort of bands and corridors of green space.
So there was likely a pretty tight rationale around deciding about that.
There was, and so, you know, it obviously, it creates more density, intensity. You know, they're obviously trying to create a sort of a downtown Main Street feel here, and then utilizing the existing floodplain and ponds and wetland areas or wetter areas as, you know, areas for their green space preservation, which we have some tree preservation requirements, streamside protection requirements, which actually wasn't even in place when this project went through. But you can tell there on the little red box there, that's where our streamside protection zone is currently.
My only thought would be that if that sort of work had already been done, that we could benefit from at least acknowledging that in whatever we talk about here. That's all.
You bet.
So, if something like this had been built hypothetically, would the existing green spaces then be open to later development, or are they somehow set aside?
They would be set aside just like this project shows. So they might be in public hands, they might be in private, just as, you know, maintained or preserved open space, green space. You know, that level of detail we hadn't gotten to it yet, but yes, this overall layout would have to remain as it's shown here.
Jeremy, do you recall what the tree preservation percentage requirement is under the proposed community services zoning district? Is it 20%?
I don't know, but I can find it just a second. Services, 20%.
Are there that many trees on this?
There's not a great deal on the south side. I think along that tributary, there's some old fence row trees, I believe. It's our intent, if I remember correctly, I think along the south side of the property is a corridor that we acquired some trail easement when this project is going through, as well as the Springwoods property to the south. And so I think there's a planned multi-use trail connecting Van Ash down Highway 112 to get to this property and then over through Fiber Creek.
Yeah, here's the trail.
Yeah, there you go.
Corridor right there.
And so
Is
that's
it actually parallel to 112?
correct.
The 20% number, is that number of trees or land
This
area?
percent
or what?
canopy of the site, so let's say they only have 10% on site, 10% canopy relative to the land area, then they'd have to preserve all 10%. If they have 25% canopy, they can go down to 20% before they have to mitigate or do anything else. And that's during the development that we review that, not during the zoning.
Okay. And I had another question. On the Enduring Green Network, this is something we've talked about before. I think it's one of our kind of big goals of the Environmental Action Committee is to review things that go on in the Enduring Green Network, but, you know, we don't really have any pull, you know. So when you guys, as a department, are reviewing, zoning requests or anything in the Enduring Green Network, how does that get treated differently? Like, are there different criteria or different zones available to use, or?
There are not really any different zones available, so the zone is available, someone can apply for heavy industrial on the site if they wanted to. We wouldn't recommend it likely, because it's not what our future land use plan tells us, and it wouldn't be compatible with other zones. So how the Enduring Green Network was created was utilizing the FNHA study of an overall was it a two-county area, I think they did? Was it both Washington and?
Yes, it was.
Well, I think it's a two-county area. And so we took their data and essentially did an overlay over the city of Fayetteville, and then utilizing, so it's the Enduring Green Network concept is one of our 6 major goals in our future land use plan. So looking at infill and fighting sprawl and transportation network and housing, creating housing opportunities. We utilize that then to develop the city plan, which is called the future land use map. So that sort of raw data was utilized to formulate that this is should be a city neighborhood area. Now, what zone does that mean? It doesn't really point you to a very specific zone, but it points you away from some zones. So it's not going to be industrial likely. It's preferred to be in portions of the property, mixed use, or things that a neighborhood can benefit from. But that's, like I said earlier, it's a broad brush stroke, so every zoning has to be very specific and contextual, and so that may not be appropriate, a quarter mile away from here, just because of the context.
I know we've had some, debates in here, and I don't think I understand all the ramifications, but this was months and months ago, there was a property on the west side of town, for a new, for an artery, road to go through, and there was discussion about high-density, housing in there because it would support transportation loop on that artery.
Right.
And it was in the middle of the Enduring Green Network, and it just seems counterintuitive to put high density, with no grass, no yards, no trees, relatively,
Yep.
in the Enduring Green Network.
I think you have to, that's a very good point, because I think we have to explain this, particularly to the Planning Commission, who sees zonings almost every meeting. And with new members, that's a very hard concept to get around, because almost the entire southwest side of Fayetteville is in the Enduring Green Network. It doesn't necessarily mean we're all going to just say no development in southwest side of Fayetteville. What it's identifying, and one of the criteria that those parcels were used to identify was larger landowners that could possibly be approached to preserve their property or put a conservation easement on it, because it had some intrinsic value, environmental value, ecological value, or potential for having such. And so what we look for when we're utilizing that particular data set is not necessarily, this 59.66 acres, unless the city wishes to purchase it, we're not going to be able to preserve it. Like Mount Kessler, we were able to preserve that because we ended up purchasing it. And it was on the Enduring Green Network, so it really gave a catalyst for us to be able to do that. However, what we look for generally are there areas that are prime habitat, that perhaps it's a corridor. Even the language of the Enduring Green Network, if you read that section of the city plan, talks about it might be only a 20 or 30 foot wide corridor that you're actually end up preserving, even though the map, the hatch shows it this wide, which is a half mile. So it depends on the property. Again, it's context sensitive. You have to look at the desires and the property rights of the property owner as well, and sort of balance that against all of our policies, trying to keep in mind that all the other 5 goals are at play as well.
And that leads to a question probably for you, Blake, and that is, just in discussion here, because we don't know all the legalities, one thing that was tossed out for discussion was, what about in the Enduring Green Network if we said you have to use low-impact development techniques, which that's a whole broad range of potential things anyway. It's not just a fixed list, but could we encourage or even require certain building techniques, like, and again, I'm no expert in low-impact development, but, you know, say curbless streets with swales and rain gardens instead of curb and gutter, or, I don't even know what else, but, you know, there's a lot of potential things, but I think the discussion led to, we can't require stuff like that.
Encourage, yes. Require, particularly given this last legislative session, no.
Okay.
How familiar are y'all with the Private Property Protection Act? It's Act 1002 of 2015. Basically, it says that if a municipality passes any regulatory scheme that permanently diminishes the value of any property by 20% or more, then we get to pay. You know, it's a fair market value assessment that would be determined by a jury, but, you know, regulatory scheme is basically anything. Zoning, landscape plans, tree preservation plans. If we implement any new regulations at this point, we risk running afoul of this statute.
How's that enforced? Is that if a city tries to zone something one way and some property owner doesn't like it and they get someone to appraise their property and someone says, hey, this is going to cost me, you know, over 20%.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who's the arbitrator in that? I mean, how does that get determined?
The landowner would file a lawsuit in civil court. You know, they would put on their evidence, the city would put on our evidence, and a jury would determine whether the property was diminished in value.
And Blake, that's like an inverse condemnation claim.
Basically, yeah.
And would that also apply if the city declined a rezoning request?
I think it could.
You have to pay it.
Yeah.
Civil court to be anything, I guess, couldn't.
Yeah.
Of course, again, I'm not a property appraiser, but I mean, one might be able to argue that this wouldn't diminish. It might make one part of town a higher value, you know, create a destination location, you know, with the unique characteristics and, but I guess it all depends on who's
Depends on
developing it and,
how the jury looks at it.
yeah.
Well, that was the whole argument with the Walmart that's going in down there, is that, you know, if you want to sell something quick and you've got a buyer, you're gonna want to fight anything that takes that away from you.
So Jeremy, I know you need to be leaving very soon. So we're looking right now at a community services designation. Can you give us just briefly, before you have to go, what the other zoning classifications are in the area of reasonable terms that this could be zoned to?
So just within the surrounding area, you have another community services zone to the north. You know, you can see there's another PZD actually down there, that big green blob. That's the Springwoods PZD. There's some multifamily, some single family. You know, I think if I were, from your perspective, because the Planning Commission, again, by statute, makes recommendations on zoning, so they're trained in it, I would probably hesitate, I could be out of line here, but hesitate to recommend a specific zone, but rather make more of a policy, you know, comment, essentially. That's what a lot of our other subcommittees do, is we're not recommending this be, you know, residential RMF 12, because you may or may not know, you may or may not like that, if you really got to know it. You know, I think you kind of have to be careful about that, making specific recommendations, but, you know, it's sort of a wide open door. If I were looking at this and, you know, concerned about some of the certain specific items that you all have mentioned, I would probably say, you know, perhaps there's a way to split this zone. I truly believe, because the east side of Highway 112 is already zoned C2, which is our most high-intense strip commercial type zoning. It's not going to change unless property owner comes to us and says we want to change it. That the frontage it's going to probably be a 5-lane highway, and so that warrants some sort of commercial or higher intensity activity along the highway frontage. As you go further west, I think like I said again, you know, you could transition to lower density to decrease that intensity. Anytime you're decreasing intensity or density, you know, you're in theory lessening the impact on the property. And that's where, when I watched the video, that's where a lot of the concerns were. You know, there's a lot of tools we don't have in our toolbox. I think from the particularly the ecological or wildlife preservation component, we simply don't have a lot of those things within our toolbox to utilize to preserve land on you know, those bases alone, notwithstanding cash to purchase the property. And so working within the ordinances we have now, you know, there's floodplain, there's wetland areas, there are streamside protection zones, and so, you know, a formulated statement out of this group about, you know, be aware of these factors, I think is a very valid thing to at least have publicly stated. It's something that we consider as part of our review, but again, it's sort of a large piece of property. You're making a pretty big determination on the zoning there. But, you know, so there's down from community services intensity is
Neighborhood services?
Neighborhood services, which allows very small scale, 3,000 to 5,000 square feet of commercial buildings. You know, the intent here was to try to create a better form of development with community services as opposed to having another car dealership and another, you know, whatever other business you don't like. A North College Avenue, essentially, which is what C2, that all of North College is C2. And so that's the type of development pattern that you get generally with that. So we did not want to go to C2, but we also wanted to recognize the fact that there will be a commercial, whether we zone it back to agricultural or not, the property owner eventually is going to be coming back to request this of something.
One question I've got, so that entire parcel, you said there's actually two owners, two banks, or?
So there's the 59.66 acres is one bank.
Okay.
And so that's the parcel really under discussion.
So now, once it's rezoned to whatever, then can they parcel it off and sell pieces?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So.
And a zoning doesn't have to be the entire parcel. You can split it up into multiple zones.
So like if they sell off the road frontage to one developer, let's say, for commercial stuff presumably, then that leaves the rest of it, but it's still in the same zoning classification.
Yes. So
what prevents commercial from going somewhere out there?
It can. So if it's zoned community services, it can be anything, as I mentioned before, it can be anything from, you know, commercial to multifamily to single.
So theoretically, it could all be commercial, or it could all be multifamily, or it could all be any one of those things.
That's correct. It doesn't place a required percentage of uses on any of those. It just provides the opportunity to have those uses.
Okay.
That's why I mentioned maybe, you know, splitting it up, so part of it's not as intense or dense.
I like the discussion of splitting it up. We were talking, last time, I don't think that anybody had the illusion that we could maintain the entire plot of land or should maintain the entire plot of land the way it is, but you're talking about tools in the toolbox. Peter, can you go back to the previous PZD? Where was that? It looks like in this that they've definitely considered a lot of the specific structures that we were talking about last week, not last month, I guess. Is there any tool in the box for sort of preserving those, or when you zone it without a specific plan, can those be designated as this needs to be considered later?
Not really, and I think that would be ideal in this scenario. Identify the most valuable areas, if you want to call it that, and go ahead and set up some sort of preservation easement or something of that nature. But without the owner coming forward with a plan, it's really not possible. And generally, what you see in a project like this, as I mentioned, it was, you know, almost 900,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
They would never have gotten the zone at the time without a plan because of just the enormity of the project. So that what we are recommending is much less than what actually was approved originally. So I think that's the other part of the PZD question you had earlier, is that a lot of times it's for a project that otherwise might not have ever gotten approved, and so they're offering these things up you know, like the green space or whatever happens to be to gain that approval.
But if it is split up and parceled out, now the development may be happening by a variety of interests that aren't all
Sure.
planning with one mind.
And so then at that point, we're using what tools we have at our disposal, like I mentioned, the green space, tree preservation, streamside protection, floodplain, wetlands.
And if you'll recall from the previous meeting, when the city engineer was here, he talked about the streamside protection corridor that does exist, you know, along this north-south area.
And
here,
is it now wider than what would have been on
and
this
then
plan?
this area as well.
And that was a, what, a 50-foot buffer zone?
It's 50 feet on either side, so it's about 100 foot,
Okay.
plus the stream, although you can pretty well step across it.
Could we take a quick look at the exhibits you showed that, mentioned where the trail would be?
Yes.
I'm starting to think about a 5-lane highway with a trail beside it, and I'm wondering if maybe the
More like a
trail,
sidewalk.
is it possible that that trail could be altered to go,
They'll probably plan to do the same thing they did under Garland or MLK, just put it underneath the roads.
well, it's running parallel.
But it eventually goes under and goes to Van Ash, so
Well, that's crossing.
it's hard to do it on the curve.
But I'm trying to imagine a nice pleasant walk along a 5-lane highway for how many miles, half a mile or so?
So we're actually doing something.
Is the trail path pretty much immutable? Could that be part of that plus a stream preservation, be part of an idea that would introduce a natural division that would somehow work everything?
It could, certainly, and, you know, I think that this is on our master plan. It doesn't always end up being exactly as shown on the master plan. You know, along Van Ash, for instance, we're actually constructing the trail. It's also it's a 4-lane road with a median. I mean, so it's got an offset sidewalk, and then it's got a cycle track, essentially, a dedicated.
Is that city limit? Van Ash, is that city limit?
It is, so where you see the white there, non-colored, that's the city, that's the county. So, this is at our very far northern reaches of the city in this area.
Okay.
Once again, if I may, which bank owns the part that's still unzoned?
Either Legacy or Simmons. I don't remember which one was which. I think there's Legacy in Bank, and I think Simmons Bank was the other one that was involved.
He's got it here.
I remember looking it up in the last meeting, but I don't remember what the answer was.
What's the black line with the dots?
Those are our, the sewer line.
Okay.
The utility just through the
Okay.
property.
Jeremy, with the neighborhood services, category, would that preserve more green space than the CS?
For, like, as in tree preservation?
I think that's also 20%, isn't it?
Yeah, it's also 20%. And really, that's really for, the tree preservation component. Really, the only tool, again, that we have to, effectively, acquire green space through our development regulations is through our parkland dedication ordinance. And that's only effective when you have a residential development. So, if there is a large residential neighborhood and there is a desire for a park here, then there could be the, ability to actually dedicate a park for the impact fee essentially associated with the residences. But, you know, for the trail, for instance, we'll likely have to purchase that, because we want to use it for a trail corridor, then we generally purchase those.
Do we have any other questions for Jeremy? I know you have a family.
No, that's fine. Yeah, I'm happy to be here. So, it's a good topic of conversation to have, honestly. I mean, it's really it's always been a struggle, I think, in our community of finding a good balance of tools that we can utilize to meet all of those goals. And, you know, we're constantly doing research to try to find out what best way to outfit our staff and plan commissioners and council members as well in these sometimes difficult discussions.
I guess just kind of a hypothetical, if we had another tool, like, you know, like if we had a study that had been done or something that designated a creek as critical for some reason for a certain plant or an animal or I don't know what, does that really do anything for you? I mean,
Only if we would have an ordinance then that stated you have to have some sort of buffer or, something around that. So, even the wetland issue is outside our authority, that's outside our jurisdiction. So we recognize it, but the Corps of Engineers can just say, yes, go ahead and mitigate that, and you don't have to worry about it any longer. So we don't really have any jurisdiction over saying no to that. We can write them a comment, saying we prefer it to be here, but we don't have the ability to make that final decision.
and we can't overstep and dictate how things are mitigated, because it's all federal authority, I guess, and so we can't even offer suggestions necessarily.
We can certainly, I think, the local, dialogue is certainly a lot more beneficial. If we can get in on the front end and have a conversation about, the project plan and, what the goals are, and the fact that we have one of the 5 goals, being Enduring Green Network, it's certainly something we can use as leverage a lot of times with a development, but that's generally in smaller doses than what most people would prefer. It's not, we're not gonna preserve 30 acres of this, we're gonna preserve maybe a corridor, that might, may or may not be valuable, to the ecosystem. So-
We had heard a story about, mitigation, of wetland mitigation for a parcel somewhere where they went to a different county.
Oh, yeah, it happens all the time.
That church right there.
It's
Yeah.
actually
Oh, that
true.
was right.
It's going to, they're mitigating in Benton County.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
Isn't it true that sewer lines, there is a certain right-of-way that the city owns for those?
Is it easement generally?
Yeah. And isn't it also true that they usually follow terrain features that are stream threads? Isn't that pretty much true?
They generally engineer them so they flow downhill,
Well, of
by
course
the
it
laws
is.
of gravity, and so a lot of times, yes, they can follow
So-
stream corridors to
So
achieve that.
there's another coincidence there that's working along the idea I'm having about trail and easement
Mhm.
and
Yeah, we use those a lot when we
stream
can.
thread.
When we can locate on a sewer easement, we do that quite often. One, it's already disturbed ground, because there's a pipe in the ground there. Secondly, there's already an easement, so the property owner, there's already a right that's being, purchased there, and so we try to locate, there where we can.
Could we recommend a certain amount of acreage be used for the parkland preservation?
I think that would really depend upon, so there's a specific, calculation for per residential unit within our impact fee, our parkland dedication ordinance.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would really dictate how many, acres that might be, set aside. The challenge with this is we don't know if it's going to be even residential at this point in time. Gut feeling says probably some of this property will be developed residentially, but we don't know how many units or, what type of units. Multifamily and single-family has different rates of dedication, for instance. So it would be very hard to, I think, say a different number outside our parkland dedication ordinance. I don't think we could legally be bound by that because of the way the law is written right now.
Mm. So, and the CS is that considered a residential zoning?
It allows both commercial and residential.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
So you think part of it will end up being some other type of residential?
I think
Not a
so.
mixed
That's
use?
just a gut feeling based on market and where you lie here. Too far off the road's probably not going to be viable for a lot of commercial development unless a new road, ties in, although we do have shown a collector street to tie in the future. So that very well, Truckers Drive extends up to the north, and there's a new Salem Road that cuts across. That intersection might be very viable for a smaller commercial node. Probably not as much so as Highway 112, but, a smaller neighborhood service, something of that nature.
Somebody mentioned relocating trails. Are the trails ever used since you're already purchasing lands, to acquire things that might be desirable to keep undisturbed or less disturbed?
They are. We've purchased, council has approved purchases of whole tracts of property. I mean, they're not large. There may be a lot, a quarter acre here or something, wherein the property owner was willing to sell, but they would only sell the whole property and not just the easement. So we've actually, in South Fayetteville, we've purchased several tracts like that to assist, and we just leave them as they are. So we clean it up a lot of times, and then it's just habitat. So. I am going to get in trouble if I don't go.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeremy, we appreciate
Yeah,
you
you
being
bet.
here. All right, so I really like Jeremy's point on, instead of talking about specific zoning, talking about recommendations for when they do look at specific zoning. I mean, the city council's going to rezone this, but chances are when a developer comes along, they're gonna ask for at least part of it to be rezoned again anyway. That's generally what happens, so, what do y'all think about that?
Well, the things I've brought up, really are looking to the things that Joe brought up. You can't have it all. So the parts that make more sense to retain, to me, center around where the stream threads are, where the water is, where it ends up going. And, so our recommendation, the things that I would consider being smart for us to recommend would be ideas that pull things together in the way that I've been describing. Taking a look at the work that was done originally on the first PZD, taking a look at how a trail might be a little more friendly if it wasn't beside a major honking thoroughfare, using easements that are already in place. And I think there's some kind of, what's the word, synergy there that could be, we could articulate that. That might be a starting point for conversation.
Well, if I may, referring to what Richard's saying, this is less disturbed than, say, over at Salem Road on the west side of this same parcel, basically, it's prairie land. There's still some infrastructure built on some of that land that hasn't been, turned into apartments or two-stories, mansions and so forth. But we still have a chance that any part that's set aside will be easily restorable to its natural state on what's left to be rezoned. It's not like something that's already had concrete and so forth, and soil removed. And this is so much about the, as Joe would say, hydric soil, the absorbent soil. And it's part of being resilient. As Joanne is part of an organization that's about resilience. And this, having that soil in our city next to every home, still a little usable, tillable soil for wildflowers or for food growth is a desirable thing. And I think that I wish we could get a rezoning that's about soil preservation and water protection by keeping the soil. Because the way houses are built nowadays, you eliminate all absorbent soil. You can see it almost everywhere. And they put in a little flower bed for you to grow something, or a little hole in the sidewalk for a tree. So the enduring network was set. I think we were naive about it in that we thought it meant what it said. We were hoping that, at least. I think Joe and so many people that were, several people here last month were involved in that. And we're all thrilled about what's being saved at Kessler Mountain. But some of what's being done by the park department to get everything built that they project on parts of that should be mitigated by saving the land over here or something. The city will be radically changing the landscape at the new regional park. And it will cause flooding, increased flooding and pollution, potentially all the way down the town ranch, all the way down to Cato Springs Ranch and into the town ranch and so forth, and Beaver Lake. So it's hard to do something, as Blake says, looking at these regulations, but I hope Fayetteville's the first city that stands up and takes them all the way to U.S. Supreme Court, if need be, on local regulations, because you know, maybe people out in these small towns here really don't want any zoning. They want it to stay whatever they do on their land, and you understand that, that's great. But all the major cities in America are eventually, you know, if their state tries to pass something like that was passed in our legislature, it's just going to be laughed out, I think. I don't think is it possible that would go nationwide, Blake, in your opinion?
That could be difficult.
But it's there right now, it's in place, so, yeah, we don't want to do anything too shocking, but obviously, trying to just rezone it as agricultural, what's the category, A1?
RA.
RA, and it's called residential agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
And you see it all around the edges where we still got cattle and so forth, and people making hay and whatnot. Well, that land is not quite in its natural state. We talked about prairie that we're trying to restore, but it certainly can be, as long as that soil is there in the future, somebody can still grow things that they want for various reasons. The water will still be cleansed when it soaks in, but under any zoning, I guess we've got, except that, it's legal to take off most of the vegetation or all of it and render it and eliminate that whole layer of precious soil on top. It's the reason people, that and the wells, shallow wells, were the reasons that springs, that people could settle here and be quite comfortable.
Do you recommend that some of it be zoned RA?
I would certainly want as much as possible. If it's got to be rezoned in a hurry.
Can I ask, okay, just, and I don't know, I don't mean to cut you off, but as far as trying to formulate a recommendation from our group here, I think, you know, Jeremy made it kind of clear that, you know, we have to presume that the frontage is going to be developed, you know. So let's just hypothetically say we recommended to develop the frontage as CS, which means it could be commercial, could be something else, but probably commercial. Then what else could the rest be that's less dense than CS that would?
So the block underneath is RMF.
That's
12.
residential multifamily, 12
Yeah.
units an acre.
Even just a blend back through neighborhood services would be, like,
Yeah,
less impact.
Yeah, neighborhood services, I think that was the,
Mhm.
yeah. So like, I would support CS for the frontage and then neighborhood services for the rest, just as something for the council or for the zoning to consider, just to help reduce the density potential.
The top chunk was rezoned at council at a previous meeting, right?
What's that?
The top chunk did get rezoned already?
The church chunk?
No,
Sounds like
that
this
weird
big
shaped chunk at the
This
top.
says RSF,
Like,
That's what.
RSF 8, but I don't know if this is current or this.
Yes, the other.
It was already zoned
northern
separately.
portion.
We're still looking at an old map then on some of our
Yeah, there's another.
stuff.
Yeah, that one, yep.
Oh, that's the future land use.
This has already been through planning though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Before council. So any recommendation we give would be to council, not planning.
Yeah.
Right.
So the idea of recommending that we split this would not be something council would
This
do, no?
has actually been pulled, I mean, this is not on the agenda now, so staff's gonna bring back a completely new request.
Okay.
This land has no zoning, so, yeah, staff can bring back two rezoning requests if they want, to rezone the back portion, or, you know, just a portion of it as something and a portion of it as another, but we do have to take in consideration what is directly surrounding.
Yeah. So what's
the-
RSF 8, what's that one?
So this, originally, this was part of a big, it was part of, they were gonna rezone all of this area at the same time,
Yeah.
and the 59 acres was pulled and
Okay.
tabled indefinitely and gonna be brought back. The RSF 8 was part of the PZD originally, and it now has been rezoned to residential, single-family, 8 units an acre.
Single family.
So that is the
Okay.
current zoning here. You can see the community services along the north side. There's being a church constructed up here. You've
Now, is
got-
it gonna take that entire parcel, the church?
My understanding is the church is gonna be towards the back, correct me if I'm wrong, Blake, and then they're creating outlots towards the front for commercial development along
Okay.
the highway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that back little chunk part of it, or is that,
Here,
yeah?
I honestly don't know. I haven't looked at the detailed plan for their large-scale development.
Google hasn't snapped a new shot recently.
Yeah, and you do have
Or the
residential
streets,
agricultural
you go all the-
here,
that's where the streets when you go through.
and then you have more RA to the north of the community services, again, the residential multifamily, a little bit of industrial even here.
Are there any potential legal issues for you with splitting up one piece of property? So one bank owns this whole 60 acres, would there be any potential legal issues if the council passed something that said back half is gonna be zoned this way, front half is gonna be zoned this way?
I think it depends on how it's filed with the county, you know, if there's not a lot split, if it is just one contiguous parcel in the land records, I think you would have some trouble. If it's split up into separate parcels, you'd certainly be able to do that.
Be easier to do.
Mhm.
Do we know any information about that?
Hang on.
I would assume that we would be able to see parcel lines, here if they existed, and I'm not seeing any
No.
parcel lines, so I don't, like here, these
Can't see
would
that
be
far.
parcel lines right there.
Doesn't look like it has.
So I'm not seeing any.
So as one parcel, it would presumably be very difficult for us to recommend a split since the bank owns it as one piece of land.
Yes. And again, you know, what could end up happening is the developer or owner comes back at some point in the future and asks for a rezone.
Right, it's gonna
From
be-
whatever the
yeah.
council passes this time.
They could split it.
And one point that Jeremy made earlier, and it's something we may want to consider, is that, you know, the city can actually ask for more parkland dedication,
Mhm.
if it has a multifamily feature to it.
That's what I keep thinking.
But
But that, we wouldn't get multifamily for the whole,
that's probably not, I mean, even if it were zoned multifamily, I don't see a developer coming in that could afford that when it's frontage and being able to build multifamily.
They
and
just
make
ask
it
for it to be
gas-
but
changed.
maybe
mean,
that west side could remain, and we could have some park preservation over on that side.
It's possible. If it were separate parcels, or like, you know, if
It
it could
sounds
be
like
divided.
Jeremy was saying that a split would be optimal.
Where does the future road come into play?
It's, right along
I
the
mean,
north here.
Up and down.
No, not Van Ash, the Salem and
Salem.
Truckers Drive extensions through all of that.
Oh, it's this,
Orange
I mean-
ones, that truckers and that Salem.
right.
If the bank owns the land now and the city plans on building a road on it someday, at what point does that get acquired?
We'll make the developer build the road.
Okay,
As the plans come through.
and you make them build it where you want it? Or where we want it?
Generally, I mean, we have our plan, but you also see plans as they come through large-scale development that change in position. And sometimes what the city has is the alignment will shift a little bit based on the development needs of whoever's building on the property.
Was that projected, street associated with that PZD?
There were several through there, yeah. And do they do the same thing with trails?
where it
Have the
dates.
developer,
Sometimes.
because that that, north-south branch of trail right there is headed
Yeah,
straight
that's
up
one of
that, one of the waterways on the property.
So,
Uh,
Taking the PCD and.
Peter, do you see the north-south part of the pink trail line I'm talking about, right there?
Right here?
Yeah, I mean, that's
Okay.
headed straight up the waterway. If that were part of the plans and the conditions for development when they're,
isn't that the existing trail
yeah.
over there by the Sam's Club?
Yeah, but it ends at Sam's, it doesn't.
No, the trail by Sam's Club is.
Oh, I'm looking, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm looking
Yeah.
too far south.
Since we have no idea what's actually gonna be developed here, like at all, like it could be a church in a parking lot, and it could be frontage in a neighborhood, and it could be, I mean, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, at this point, is it useful even to give a recommendation about zone splits that we don't think we can do, or is it a better, I mean, he seemed to suggest, you know, a policy comment on, you know, this is what we need to take into account, and then us as a committee need to start attacking the question of what the Enduring Green Network means, and,
Yeah.
you know, what percentages of free canopy means, and all this stuff. I mean, for this specific parcel, it seems like our hands are kind of tied.
Yeah.
So does that mean that we're going for like a new ordinance?
Going forward, we probably have to, or at least a redefinition of, or an amendment to the Enduring Green Network or something.
Mhm.
I don't know how we would work our way through that, but for this property, I just don't
Yeah.
know there's all that much we can do.
Yeah, 'cause those are kind of two separate things. That's why I wanted Blake here to kind of talk about, you know, after we get through this discussion, to talk about a possible new zoning criteria.
Mhm.
But to your point, what I had kind of written down, because I like Jeremy's point, because we don't know what's going to happen here, and most definitely someone's going to ask to rezone it when someone decides they want to put something here. Whether it be, if we split it into 5 different types of zoning, they might come back and ask it all to be 1, or all to be 2, or whatever it may be, or 5 different people could buy it and ask for, I mean, it could
Mhm.
still be split. And so I was just writing down some points, and I thought, well, if we were to make a policy comment, we could, you know, make a policy comment that when it is rezoned and development comes through, we encourage preservation in that area, in this specific area, or at the very least, in an area close by, or at the very least, at Woolsey Wet Prairie, you know, thinking of our, you know, what our goals are, where we want the mitigation to be, or preservation.
I like that, Alan.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and then encourage LID development, on this property when it is developed. Recommend that the frontage be broken off, from the remainder, and then, recommend that there be a family zoning element to the back portion of this property, so that
With
in the-
parkland preservation.
right, so that the city could require parkland preservation going forward.
Mhm.
Preferably contiguous to the existing, nature areas as opposed to just.
Right.
Would that policy comment, right, because all we do is give recommendations to council, would that policy comment stay with this piece of property? So let's say it's 6, 7 years before anything happens, and then 6, 7 years, a developer comes forward and says, here's my plan. Where is this policy comment gonna be? Is it gonna be in a file, or is this gonna be like, oh, we said this 5 years ago, and now it's...
Well, if we make a recommendation like that, it would go into this agenda packet, with this rezoning, and it would be a permanent public record of this rezoning request. And usually when they look at rezonings, they look at why it was zoned to what it was zoned to. So, I mean,
So they'll dig that out?
yeah,
So
it'd be
if
a
nothing
permanent
else,
public
it would-
record
okay.
that we made
So it
the,
would go into the initial action that would be taken with y'all's policy direction would be, planning is going to revamp their, potentially, the rezoning request and bring forward to city council a rezoning item, and y'all's policy statement would be part of that. Their recommendation is gonna be, reflect y'all's recommendation, and then y'all's policy statement would be a part of that permanent record.
So when it comes up 6 years later, it would come before this committee again, and they would have this document that,
Yeah.
in
I mean,
theory, would
you know,
be ready to go
so the packet that I shared with you all, on this rezoning item was a, part of the, staff report here. It's 35-page
Mhm.
packet.
Right.
It has all that history as part of it.
Got it.
So
So
that's
this
when
would be
all that,
added to that.
yeah, gets presented at the time of development.
and we could actually put that in our recommendation too, that when this property is rezoned the next time, the Environmental Action Committee requests to see this rezoning again.
Right. And I think that maybe moving forward, that's what we need to shift our focus to, is figuring out how to make it where when these things come to planning, if they have to do with the Enduring Green Network, we get to see them ahead of time or something.
And I'm not sure if, and Blake, you might be able to answer that, I'm not sure if we would be able to see something before it goes to planning. I know the city council can refer stuff here, but I don't think planning can.
I don't think they're set up to refer to anybody other than like subdivision committee.
Yeah. But
Well,
the
maybe
city
that
council
needs to
can
be
sit.
I was about to say, yeah, I mean, I think part of this is we keep
Yeah.
getting these things after our hands are tied. Like, by every time we've dealt with zoning over the past 2 years, we can argue about it all we want, but those decisions, it seems like, have already been made.
Let's work on changing that.
Yeah.
I think what you have to, keep into context is that the planning commission and their structure and the ordinances that Jeremy, or state law that Jeremy talked about that sets them up
Right.
is set to, address these kinds of, I mean, they're the body that has
That's
that
their job.
decision-making power, that's their legislative
Yeah.
authority.
It's just that one of our missions is to review, I don't remember how it's worded now.
Matters concerning the
Matters
environment.
concerning the Enduring Green Network, but we don't have any authority or any,
Well,
we're
it doesn't even
we're late to the
say
party
that
automatically.
that's supposed to happen. But that was something that was set up by a council member. It doesn't explicitly say in the legislation that Enduring Green Network zoning should come to us.
Right.
At least, I didn't find
Okay.
it when I looked for it after last
No,
night.
I don't know where I got that.
y'all's ordinance is, recommendations to the council on matters concerning the environment.
And then an
environmental-
alderwoman at one point had set up a precedent where they came before you. But that's not actually, we don't have anything in writing that I
Maybe
know of
that's
that,
what it was.
And
by
it's the
mandate.
first time it's actually been done, from what I understand, an actual rezoning
Yeah,
being
the-
referred.
We've seen a couple.
Yeah, they've looked at some other rezonings that have come through
Yeah.
Were they,
previously.
but they were tabled and actually referred?
I don't
think
recall
that's
that where
ever
any have been actually tabled.
Yeah.
But they came from the council.
We gave a couple of comments last year.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
I knew that comments had happened before, but this, I think, was the most formal,
Yeah.
please look at this and
Mm-hmm.
give us a recommendation.
Richard, did Alan's recommendation cover what you were recommending earlier? or-
Well, I think it's, we just heard a kind of a jagged little conversation about power. And, I think probably we could also be effective in being brokers of good ideas. Good ideas that bring concepts together, like what I've been suggesting, some of these things. I'm a map person. I've spent a lot of time thinking about maps and working for engineers and drawing CAD drawings and so forth. And, you can't argue, Joe, even you won't be interested in arguing with, paying attention to where the water goes. That land out there, the hydric soils, there's a big corner of it up there at the intersection of Van Ash and, Highway 112. Some people developed a grape vineyard there about 20 years ago. Remember that? Remember when that was open hayfield? If you drive by there now, you can see the grapevine structures in there. The soil hasn't changed. It's still the same soil you're describing, but it has grown up thick as they'll stick with Roger pears, you name it. That's a natural part of the process as well. So focusing on tree canopy, somebody might wander out there and go, well, look at this marvelous tree canopy we've got. But really, this might seem rambling to you, but the dynamic of the soil and the element that Joe is the advocate for, the critters that live in that type of soil. You look back in the preservation area down here, they've been clearing trees. They've been making it so light can come in and foster the kind of growth that they want. So trying to look a little deeper and try to think about what's already in place and the logic of the way the terrain runs and where to put your trail, where it would be nicer to have the trail, and the streamside protection ideas. My advocacy is for us to think of all the good ideas we can that tend to preserve the things that we want to preserve, rather than get into some kind of adversarial, I'm gonna make you do this sort of thing. So that's a general repeat of what I just said before.
Did you have the aspect about the trail maybe not being right along the highway?
Yeah, I'm just trying to, I was thinking about that. I'm just not sure how it fits into the policy, recommendation on zoning. That might be a recommendation we could make to the Active
Well,
Transportation Committee.
let's think about how the
Something.
story unfolds. It's 2-lane right now, there's gonna be pressure immediately to develop it wider,
Yeah.
right? And it's not very suitable. You're gonna be going down and hauling in red dirt to widen your street. Where is your trail? Is your trail planned for the kind of development that's gonna take place there? Or would it be much simpler and better idea just to think about another place to put it? So you don't have to deal with the evolution of the 5-lane
Yeah.
over time.
And I see your point, but what I'm saying is that I think that comment, although how good it may be lost in a recommendation about the zoning, because the council's not going to be considering the trail in the rezoning request.
True.
So that might be a separate recommendation that comes from this committee about that trail to the Active Transportation Committee and the Transportation Committee, but when the council's looking at the zoning, they're not gonna be focusing on, the trail, because it's not really part of the rezoning request.
Do they require trail building and development cases? I'm thinking about out across Hamstring Creek. Are they requiring the trail be developed as the property gets developed down there?
If the trail is on the city's master trails plan, then generally, yes. We are able to acquire easement and require trail construction, much like street construction is required as part of the master street plan when those parcels develop. So that's one of the advantages of actually showing it on the master trails plan ahead of development, is that you can then get the developer to pay for it. And then we can spend tax dollars on trail construction in other areas where we're not going to have
So we might be looking to make a separate recommendation to adjust the trail plan so that we can take into account other environmental considerations on the land
Maybe it's-
and use that to sort of provide an additional protection for maybe some critical hydrologic structures.
Maybe it starts building goodness of an idea by being not only a good idea for how to have a trail built that's gonna stay put and not have to be redone in 10 years. And it might be a good idea environmentally to have it be somewhere near a stream protection regime and so forth. A good idea is kind of where I'm coming from, is,
Yeah.
who we sell it to.
Who's in charge of, and is there the possibility of amendment to the trail plan?
That's, well, I
Does that go
actually,
transportation, or?
I chaired the Active Transportation Committee up until coming on this board, and I'm on the Transportation Committee now. So maybe that's something we could do at our next meeting, is actually address the trail here at this site, and then write a recommendation for that, so that we can keep them two separate issues. And
My thinking that if there is some agreement about sensibility of things I was suggesting, it kind of has a bearing on how you recommend about the residential part and so forth. The idea is kind of knit together if you just kind of relax and let them do that.
Well, but I do know that there's a lot of, and Peter, you can speak to this probably a little bit too, there's a lot of thought that's gone into that master trail plan, and I'd wanna have Matt Mihailovich here, from, that works on all these master trail plans before starting to recommend something that he might already know won't work, or something like that.
Alan, and also from a practical standpoint, the landowner up in the northeast corner of this area that's kind of surrounded by 112 is a little difficult to work with. The city council approved a settlement in a condemnation case when we were acquiring the property to do the Van Ash extension from them. And it was...
Last year?
Yeah. That was my first condemnation case when I started with the city.
think I might
lasted
remember that.
most of the year. We finally settled it, but it would be difficult to go anywhere on that property other than right up against the road.
Well, and there may be sections where that's necessary, but over the entire expanse of that,
Mhm.
what may become pretty busy with vehicles turning off of the road across the trail into parking lots.
Oftentimes, you know, what can happen, not to say that necessarily will happen with this property, but what we have seen happen many times in recent development is that, you know, we have a trail corridor shown like this that, you know, skirts the perimeter of a property, and a developer comes in and says, hey, you know, you've got this trail shown in the perimeter of my property. What if I oriented my project to where the trail was an amenity running right through the middle of the property? And so that negotiation happens through the development process, but we've seen that particularly with some of our multifamily student housing projects, where the developers, you know, it's a no-brainer that the trail is something that they want to not push off to the corner, but would rather have front and center as part of the property.
Good.
So that again would be dependent on what gets developed.
Yeah, and it really, it's tough to say how that dynamic is going to look like, what that's going to be, you know, at this point, when all we're talking about is really the zoning for the
But
property.
it would be great if at least the idea was floated around while the discussion was taking place.
Yeah, well, I certainly think, you know, a recommendation from you all, that says something to the effect of adjusting the final trail construction location to, as much as possible, have a symbiotic relationship with the natural features that are on the property.
Would you rather have your trail by the sewer mainstream or the 5-lane highway?
Depends on how you like to ride your bike.
Well, the sewer line right-of-way generally smells a lot better than the highway right-of-way.
Yeah.
That's for
You know,
sure.
if
There's
it's
more
one of
wildlife
the sewer is
there, I'm
properly
sure.
installed, new like somebody. But if I may, on the, site of the trail shown in the floodplain of the stream running south through the protected area or the, conservation conserved, supposedly conserved land, for many species, Joe can tell us some that depend on having sunlight on the water in certain instances. But in general, if you look at a manual about how to conserve your farmland and protect the stream running through it, it'll talk about a protected zone as wide as you can afford it, which in Fayetteville, it's only 50 feet in our streamside protection zone. That's not supposed to have a trail in it. You should not be able to see the water in the stream except at a bridge crossing.
Yeah.
You know, you want the wildlife, the deer to be able to go through there, and the birds to be
Well,
back there,
sewer
and not be
right-of-way's gonna
chased out every time a bicycle comes by.
Sewer right-of-way's gonna be maintained open for access.
Yes, it will be, so it's great for prairie flowers. It
It
shouldn't
does have
be
to
mowed except in the
coincide.
winter like any other piece of
It coincides with the stream thread very often.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's bring the conversation, and try to decide how we're gonna recommend on this one, because I do wanna get into some other stuff, and I wanna ask Blake a couple questions, and he's patiently waiting on us, and we appreciate
I'm
that.
fine.
Will you go over what you put
Yeah.
together again, because I'm ready
Yeah.
to second it.
I'm gonna read these, and if anybody else has anything they wanna tack on here, I have encouraged preservation in this area, and that can be a little bit more specific.
Are you
I'm just
making a
jotting this
motion?
down. Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Encourage preservation in this area, or the Woolsey Wet Prairie, hopefully this specific area. Encourage LID development when developed. And then recommend that the front be broken off, or the frontage from the remainder of the property. Encourage a family element to the zoning so that we can require parkland dedication that's contiguous to the current preservation area. And recommend that the EHC committee review this property if rezoned again in the future. Does that sound, did I leave anything out?
he mentioned a reduction in intensity and density, which I thought was good, but that's pretty much covered by all that anyway.
Yeah, LID and.
Yeah, I mean, all that.
I was distracted, did you say that we would recommend rezoning to agricultural?
Oh, the RA.
This is more of a policy, recommendation, not a specific zoning recommendation, since there's no developer in the mix here. But the last part was recommend the EAC review this again, if it's rezoned in the future, which would be by a developer.
Yeah, but if it's gonna be rezoned right now, going straight to one clean, residential agricultural zoning for that property, it still will be rezoned to suit people that are buying it if it's sold by the bank. That's what I'm saying.
The problem from a development standpoint is that it's less desirable and harder to market to potential buyers if it's not already zoned something that's kind of ready to build.
But if they don't hit, in other words, but if a certain part's still going, I mean, it's probably all going, a lot of it will be rezoned, you can imagine. So that's why I'm saying, starting back at the basic rezoning doesn't cost anybody anymore, or take any more time or anything. And then when they start selling it, they'll know that it's open for rezoning.
Well, I think you're gonna get some pushback from the current owner of the property if you downzone.
Uh-huh. Okay. Well, again.
I think from the planning perspective as well, the desire was to try and get one of the mixed-use zonings applied to the property.
Be
With
more consistent with what's around it.
more consistent with what's
That's what we
around
always
it,
go
with
for,
the
yeah.
hopes that later on down the road, that could be used as a proactive measure, against getting a C2 zoning, which is what's across the street. I think if it were zoned RA right now, council's a whole lot more likely in the future to rezone it to a developer-requested C2, and the likelihood of it being rezoned from a community services, which is much more similar to C2 in use allowance, but just different form, that's less likely to happen. So by providing a proactive mixed-use zoning, it's more likely that the zoning that's selected now is actually going to stick with the property and be developed, to that zoning.
And hopefully, in between the time we put this zoning here, if it goes CS, this committee can start talking about those new types of zoning developments, and possibly, when it's rezoned, one of those could be used for preservation.
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know that that's gonna happen, but it's possible.
So can we move and second the policy comments that Alan?
That was a motion.
Well, can we have public comment?
Yeah, as soon as we have a motion in a second, so we'll take public comment. So,
Just one thing, just sitting as a member of the public with the conversation, the tools are limited to protect the species that I've presented to you, and it's obvious that they're gonna get very little protection even if the best comes out of your efforts. So, I'd just say, keep in mind that what we wanna do is protect as many of the native species as possible that inhabit this habitat, which means that when the time comes to do mitigation, I hope you guys will think long and hard about what mitigation gets done, because it really needs to be tied to biological reality and not just being county.
Would we have any say in that,
I don't know, just keep in mind, because people are probably gonna ask you, and it's about to come up again, because there's another piece of property that's immediately east of Woolsey Wet Prairie that's up for rezoning too. And it's exactly like the property that the city started with, which is now Woolsey Wet Prairie. So the species that are involved here, by the way, I really appreciate the comments you guys have made here, because I can tell that you heard what I said. They're under attack in every one of these. And the only real path for trying to salvage those species within Fayetteville developing is gonna be smart mitigation. We can salvage some of them by using these green zones next to trails and streams, that it will help. they're connectors for wildlife, and they're not, and they have a lot of value, and I really appreciate the way you guys are trying to figure out how to work this in with the fact that it's gonna get commercially developed into something. But the key thing here is gonna be to protect these species. We have the science, and it is not refutable. We know what species are in these habitats in Fayetteville, and we know that they can be protected. So if there's no legal tools to protect them on these properties, which it really doesn't sound like there's much, then mitigation is what we've got. And it's gotta be smart mitigation, that we know that we're gonna wind up with these species in a place where they can be protected. So, just keep it in mind, I don't know what role this committee will play in it in the long run, but this is gonna come up now, the next few years constantly. So, I'm all for trying to protect as many of the species as we can. And, with the tools that are available, probably mitigation is gonna be that tool. So, thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Would you like that?
Well, I've been around the town since '51 when I came up to go to school, but I always preferred it. I'd love to see a gradual transition, or some kind of graceful transition from the center of the town to what's left of the natural landscape. When I bought the land that they gave part of to the land trust, gave all of it to the land trust, I met the lawyer who handled the paper, James R. Hale, that had an office here by the courthouse, old courthouse. And he said that he had entertained a delegation of businessmen coming here years ago and getting ready to consider investing here and so forth. And as he was taking the last one to the airport, why, the man said, you know, Mr. Hale, he said, you people really don't know what you have here. Said our town was just like yours when we started, and now that it's not really too desirable place to be at all. He said, you may, it won't make a bit of difference my telling you this, if things go like some of the people in your community wanted to go, but he said, I just thought I'd warn you. And I've never forgotten that. And it seems to me now that we're entering into the science in which we realize that we're much more dependent and intricately dependent on relationships among nature that we do not, and ourselves that we do not know. We're just beginning to touch these things. And of course I keep reading the Science Times and the New York Times and so forth. And so this gives me a little bit of ammo. But I've always loved the area, I've always loved the town. For the time it was really just a little village and a lot more segregated. And I really do have a sincere interest in all these changes and how they will affect all of us. Mostly the future, because during the, I'm 84, since the Great Depression times when I was a child, dragged from Kansas to the Gulf and back to a lot of different horrible, beautiful places, well, I've felt that we should be much more dependent and much more cognizant of the different forms of life that we don't really, we ignore every day. I don't care whether it's a snake darter or something else.
Thank you, Mr. Hale.
Thank you.
All right, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Go ahead and vote, I guess. All in favor of that recommendation, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you all for looking at that. I know it was pretty intense. Took up 3 hours last meeting and hour and a half this meeting, but I think that I think that's a really good recommendation, and it forms a basis for us moving forward, and hopefully we can talk about a new type of zoning and how we even go about doing that. we have other things on the agenda too, but Blake, you're here and we appreciate that. If you could take maybe 5 minutes of just telling us, if we wanted to create some sort of zoning that helps support our enduring green network, and so when we're looking at properties, if the city council refers more things to us, which I'm assuming they will, and we want to recommend that something be rezoned to support that enduring green contiguous network throughout Fayetteville, how would we go about creating a new zone, and what type of things can we look at for that?
The last time the city did any kind of new zoning classification was 2010. That was when they adopted the form-based zones, the community service, neighborhood services, stuff like that. Planning is probably going to be your first stop. I would encourage you to have Andrew Garner, the city planner, come in and talk to you about that, because he would have been around the last time they went through the process. If you're talking about creating a new zoning classification, I can just give you the issues that are going to come up. You want to look at the purposes for the zoning classification, the uses that you would want under that. That includes uses by right and conditional uses. What kind of design features would you want to see on the property? You know, what lot sizes are you looking at? So, like in RSF 4, you've got 4 units per acre, so quarter-acre lots, versus RSF .5, where you have 1 unit per 2 acres. And that also goes in with what kind of density do you want? You know, what kind of setbacks from the different properties do you want? But overall, your focus should be on, you know, what's the highest and best use of this particular property. And then compatibility, anytime you recommend a zoning classification, compatibility is the #1 issue for you to look at.
What do you mean by that?
Compatibility with surrounding property.
Surrounding.
Mhm. You don't want to put an industrial zone in the middle of a
Right.
residential zoning district.
Aw.
You mentioned 12 criteria decided by the courts, so that's kind of stuff like what you can use as criteria and what you can't? Is that-
Yeah, so I can just go through some of those. When you're developing a land use plan, the state has set forth 9 particular criteria for the plan. And a plan is not the law. It just helps guide the laws that are passed by the city council. So you're looking at efficiency and economy in the process of development, appropriate and best use of the land, convenience of traffic and circulation of people and goods, safety from fire and other dangers, adequate light and air in the use and occupancy of buildings, healthful and convenient distribution of population, good civic design and arrangement, adequate public utilities and facilities, and wise and efficient expenditure of funds. Now, when you've got a fight over a zoning, you know, a property owner wants CS, but the neighbors want the city council to downzone it. The courts have considered several other factors in either, you know, approving a rezoning or denying a rezoning, looking at public opposition, traffic, noise, if you decrease the value of adjoining property, any potential for criminal activity, increased litter, strain on sewage service, and spot zoning incompatibility. Incompatibility is always the #1 issue.
Is there a place you're pulling that information from that we could reference?
I can send you Kit's memo on this. Peter, I can forward that to you, and if you want to forward it to the members.
When you mentioned design features as considerations for new zones, what does that entail? What would be, is that just outward visual, or does that include construction methods?
No, the construction methods come in your commercial design standards if it's commercial property. I don't know that there are any specific residential design standards.
I guess the one that I'm thinking of is, it sounds like we're not always incompatible with development, just this type of red dirt development would do is, could you have a zone where there's limited disturbing of the existing, I don't know,
The different zoning districts have different, where that plays in a little bit is the different zoning districts have different tree preservation requirements associated with them. So many of our downtown zoning districts have 5 and 10% tree preservation
Right.
requirements. I think industrial is like 15%. Some of the
Is there an analog for soil preservation?
Well, typically, if you're preserving an area for trees, you're not disturbing the
Right.
soil, so the two kind of go hand in hand.
Mhm.
I think it's proxy
I
for
gotcha.
soil preservation, if you will.
It may
Um,
also be something you could use in a conditional use permit process where, the planning commission can place conditions on the use of the property. And maybe one of the conditions would be that, you preserve the soil that's already there. And in the variance process, when you go through a large-scale development, you kind of see this too, where, for example, there are street trees on the new, over by the Cardinal on Duncan and Center,
Mhm.
where the planning commission required them to put in a certain amount and certain type of soil for those street trees. So it could come in play for either conditions or variances.
Now, was that negotiated during a variance, or when was that, how did that get put in?
It was just a condition the staff put on it because they were asking for a variance from, I don't know if it was sidewalk width or something. So, in exchange for that, staff said, well, we want you to put these street trees in and a certain amount of soil that's more than the usual.
So in a case like that, that was during the variance process, and it was negotiated, and once they accepted it, then everybody's presumably happy, right? So the difference between that and like putting it in an ordinance or whatever, where it forces, like, let's just say hypothetically, forces everybody to use a certain kind of dirt or plant a certain kind of tree, well then, somebody would challenge that in court.
Absolutely, probably.
Yeah, so that's.
So conditional use permits are not something you use on the front end, that's almost always done during variance?
Right. Well, conditional use comes in, like, if you have,
All the zoning districts have allowed uses by right under them, and then they have what are called conditional uses as well, so.
I was gonna pull
For
up.
example, many of the single-family residential zoning districts, single-family residential is allowed by right, but multifamily is allowed as a conditional use, so it requires special ask of the planning commission.
Yes.
To get that right granted, for that, zoning.
A lot of times you see like a home-based business where in a single-family zoning district where somebody wants to have a daycare or a home office, it's a conditional use to have that, and the planning commission can place specific conditions on the property. So, you're only allowed to have cars parked there from 8 to 5, or you can only have a certain number of cars parked in your driveway between these hours.
I'm thinking of a tattoo parlor down on Archibald Yale. I think the argument that tipped the balance on the conditional use was that it was artistic. It was an artistic endeavor.
But we're less concerned about the use of what goes on inside a structure than we are the way the structure is built and what it does to the surrounding land. So are those similar enough concerns to apply existing policy structures, or do you run into?
I don't think we could force a builder to do a specific thing like that.
Like, this is kind of off on a tangent, but like, I've wondered for years, like in Tornado Alley, why don't they force people to build houses that are able to withstand tornadoes? But they don't do it. So, I don't know if it's the same legal precedent, they can't force them to make them safer.
Right.
And we can't force them to preserve the environment, I guess. Is that kind of the same precedent where we can't force them to do the right thing because they don't want to spend the money and it'd be a taking or something?
I don't know that it would be a taking. I think it would be unduly burdensome, I think is the tact that they would take.
Is there any precedent for conditional using environmental concerns in a bargaining situation for conditional use versus a variance?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's
So-
happened, yeah.
So you could, for instance, it would be within the realm of possibility to recommend, or say, okay, you want this variance, well, would you be willing to use this conditional use that you need to build this way?
Well, they're two separate things. A conditional use, I guess you can have variances within a conditional use, but you would use a conditional use as a way to get things out of a developer. And a variance process can come in either a conditional use permit or a large-scale development or whatever kind of development you've got. But yeah, that can absolutely be a bargaining chip in those discussions. And I think our planning staff is pretty good about identifying those concerns and taking care of them.
I guess we couldn't, try to push forward for a zoning classification that required the use of our new LID manual. I mean, that would, I guess, that would depend on if it would be one that was going to be developed.
Typically zoning is, a little more high level than where LID is at.
Bummer.
And the way our current zonings are set up, they talk about allowed uses, tree preservation, conditional uses, setbacks, build-to zones. They don't really get into that.
But they do have stormwater management requirements and stuff.
That's applied carte blanche on all
Yeah.
zoning districts, though. And LID is an option,
Right.
in all the zoning districts as part of that.
Yeah, but there's not any way to require LID as a better option. I mean, it's all up to them and whatever's easier.
And Blake, there may be a way, I know we're focusing on a zone, but maybe we could transition this discussion a little bit also into, for the next meeting, is instead of a new zone, should we think about more ways to incentivize using the LID within our current ordinances? I know we can't require LID in the city of Fayetteville right now, or our code of ordinance doesn't say that we can. Is there a way to incentivize it instead of requiring it?
Are you already doing that some?
To some extent.
Yeah, there are some incentives built into the stormwater manual using LID. Then you get a reduction in different types of hard infrastructure required because you're offsetting the amount of runoff by using these LID components. And I think really the staff recommendation on the LID item, at least in the near term, is let's use LID as an optional tool, work any bugs out of the system because it is still relatively new. I mean, the stormwater regulations have only been in effect for less than a year. Make any corrections that need to be made, and then let's have the conversation about where it's appropriate to require LID, or if it's appropriate to require LID.
And I don't think that, I'm not even talking about requiring, more of making it more beneficial to a developer to use it. Areas where we can say, you can have this concession if you use LID to protect our environment in these areas. Does that make any sense?
Can I get the 90-second pitch on what LID is, since that predates me?
You'd probably get a better explanation from
So low-impact development is a strategy for implementing green and sustainable features into your development. So, for example, traditional street construction would be, asphalt street with raised curbs. When it rains, all the water flows to the curbs and then down the curbs into the gutters and into pipes that then eventually lead to a stream. And so an LID application of that might be a paved street that leads to a grass swale on the side of the street, so then the water runs off the street into the swale then leads to some sort of a, maybe larger swale and eventually into the natural stream channel, rather than
stormwater detention area.
or stormwater detention area. Yeah, but essentially trying to use natural features, natural elements, as much as possible to convey, detain, retain, stormwater, where appropriate and able.
Could be even a little more untested around here would be like porous pavements.
Yep,
Things like that,
Okay.
where it can soak in, recharge groundwater, green roofs like libraries got it.
So the goal is to give developers this other option that burdens the sewage system less.
About 6 or 8 months ago, City Council adopted a new drainage criteria manual, and it has an LID option or path for developers to take if they would like to develop their property with those types of features, and then they can get reductions in the amount of hard infrastructure that's required to convey and retain and detain stormwater in exchange for incorporating these green features.
And the economics on that are neutral or beneficial to the developer? What drives them
I
to
mean,
do that?
Proven, maybe.
Okay.
It depends, and yeah,
Nobody's there yet.
and it certainly, I think, varies with sites, but certainly buying, concrete pipe and digging trenches and burying it is not cheap to do.
Okay.
So as much as you can minimize that with surface conveyance and detention and retention of stormwater, certainly there can be economic advantages.
See, if I may, one of the obvious things, you look at all these parking lots at the fast food places, so forth, they'll have a little green space out there. But that was originally natural local soil. But they leave that little green space by requirements or for beauty, and even their corporations like some flowers. But in order for that to function best in low impact, it must be set off before when you make the plans, leave that soil there. Because that soil will allow it to soak in the way it always has, and it won't need a pipe. And as we were just told, if the street or the parking lot lets water into those instead of having it curve around that green space,
Right.
then it will be in a natural situation. Doesn't need a pipe down there.
Here. Thank you. I'll quit looking at you like an idiot next time you say it.
Well, I kind of have an idea, because I know we need to move on to some other agenda items. And Peter, maybe, what do you think about this? Maybe between now and the next meeting, you and I could get together on the phone, or I could come down to the office for an hour or so, and we could put together like a questionnaire of like, what's the most important thing to people on the committee? Maybe we could send it out to Sierra Club and a couple other organizations in Fayetteville. What's the most important thing for you when it comes to mitigation and preservation? And maybe we could frame the next discussion we have using those things that are important to people, and the information Blake's given us, so that we can actually, have a very well framed discussion on something and know what goals we actually want to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah, I mean, I think really the goal of the committee, or a goal for the committee should be, trying to understand where we have gaps in either the current zoning districts that are allowed, or the, regulations that are applied, such as hillside development, streamside protection. Where could we enhance those to offer greater protections for these areas that we want to preserve? So is it this missing zoning, or is it this missing, piece of a regulation or a new regulation? So maybe we could get at some of that with what you're suggesting.
And Aubrey, don't worry, I'm gonna leave we'll leave a big section at the bottom. So you can write as much in. I'm just kidding. I like to give Aubrey a hard time. No. Okay, does that work for everybody?
Yeah, one other thing that I know we've discussed from time to time, context is during construction, depending on the size of the project, they may or may not trigger stormwater permit with the state. That's administered by the state and enforced by the state. So as far as I know, the city, I don't think, has any authority. It's assumed if it's over half an acre or acre, whatever the rule is now, that they have to, do their silt fencing and this and that.
Oh, that's all required and regulated by the city.
So the city does have authority on that?
Oh, yeah.
The MS4 or whatever?
Well, we have an MS4 permit with the state, but that...
So that gives us authority to
Yeah.
do the, okay.
It gives you,
Well, that might be...
requires you to do that, not...
Yeah, well, I knew the state required it. I
Authority,
didn't
yeah.
remember the city had any authority.
Yeah.
But I know that's something that's been discussed from time to time, is construction techniques and, dirt washing off into the adjacent creeks and things. And, I remember, we even, on one of our field trips, I think it was before you were actually on the committee, when we went out to look at a streamside restoration, and then on the way back, we drove by a construction site, and it was a mess, It was one that had caught somebody's attention. So, I don't know, that's something I know that's been discussed before, and in this context, it might be appropriate to throw that in there. Figure out how to help, or how to enforce.
Yeah.
theoretically, that stuff is not supposed to happen.
Right.
Because we do have ordinances in place that say that
Where
we're
was-
not allowed to do that, but
Yeah.
unfortunately, some developers choose not to.
Right.
Where
follow
was
the
that
ordinances.
field trip at by?
It was, Illinois.
No, we went to the
Yeah, it was behind the
West
air-
Fork of the White River
There you go.
Restoration,
West Fork?
Yeah,
behind the
yeah.
airport.
Yeah, behind
Okay.
there.
Cool.
Yeah, it was cool.
That's a great place to go.
Yeah, it was neat. Yeah.
But the bad construction site was down, between, Cato Springs Road and, 15th Street
Yeah.
on, what is it? Anyway, it's.
I know where
two
you're
lanes,
talking about, yeah.
Little cut through,
Mhm.
and, that still hadn't been developed or anything. It's still sitting there after they did all that hideous stuff, as you say.
Yeah.
And we had butterflies growing on that site because in the areas that they hadn't replaced the soil, it was a great year for milkweed.
Yeah.
But, anyway, I'll shut up on that one.
Okay, so maybe we can get together and
Yep.
do that, and then we'll send out an email, and if y'all have more thoughts on that subject, just kind of email us, and we'll try to incorporate all that.
Are we
And
gonna
I'll-
have someone from planning come in and tell us about how to pursue a different zoning?
Yeah,
If we
thinking-
go that route?
Thinking if we get when we get there, I was thinking maybe we could devote 20 minutes of a meeting for a while maybe to that, and then when we get ready to have them come, that way we don't have them come so often.
I'm-
But maybe Andrew Garner.
Yeah. I'm curious about other zoning categories that different communities use for preservation and conservation.
Oh, can I, another question might be for you. All the zoning categories that we have, are they all based on some big statewide or national code or something? Or,
I don't know exactly what they were based on. A lot of communities use these zones. I know the form-based zones are something that's used more nationwide. But each community adopts its own zoning classification. So we may have RSF4, another community might call it RSF1.
I didn't know if it
Same
was
kind
like
of density.
National Electric Code, National Fire Code, and then there was some big zoning code out there that we copied and rubber
No.
stamped, or if it
We-
was...
We probably have one of the broader zoning codes in Arkansas.
I've read the entire manual of the UDC.
Uh-huh.
It's long.
It is.
I don't recommend it for okay, we'll pick back up on that next time, and in the meantime, I'll get with you or each other and just email us thoughts, ideas, and we'll incorporate those and make sure that nobody's ideas get left out of the survey. And maybe, Aubrey, you're on the Sierra Club?
Yes, sir.
Okay, maybe we could send it out to Sierra Club too, and
Sure.
any other organizations that want to give some feedback?
Yeah,
It's a thought.
there are several in town working
Yeah.
against.
And Alan,
Evil.
I would just add that when you're thinking about the things that are important to this committee, if you can't find a zoning classification that preserves certain areas or requires soil preservation, then maybe you can, advise the council or advise planning to use these as conditions on CUPs or variance requests.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
So soil preservation being one of them, but there may be a lot more that you can come up with.
Yep. Okay. And just to follow up on the thing on the rezoning thing, Richard, you had mentioned the trails. I'm gonna ask, or Peter, one of us, I guess, could ask Matt Mihailovich to come for one of the next meetings, I guess, and we can talk about that too.
You want him want to ask him to come to the next meeting, or?
Maybe, I think we might have, I don't know that it would hurt. What do y'all think? It shouldn't take that long to talk about the trail,
No, probably not.
if he's available. I guess we'll find out first if Matt can come.
Okay, yep, I can certainly talk to
Now,
him.
we have the open spaces planning thing on the agenda next month, don't we? Is that the, Northwest Arkansas Regional Planning Commission?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Aren't they
right.
on
They
the-
burned a fair bit of that.
We might wanna do that the next meeting then.
Thanks for reminding me of that.
And in the long term, I'd really like to learn more about the parkland dedication ordinance. That was something I didn't realize was available to us.
Mhm.
Part of that long
I was gonna say,
UDC.
yeah, I can Google it,
Bedtime
find out what I
reading for you,
can.
but it'd be interesting to learn more about that at some point.
Well,
these
park
kind-
board meets here once a month too, and they always have to
Do that.
discuss it, yeah. So you
Kind
can
of
see
like-
that on Government Channel, you can go back and see the old park
Right.
board meetings.
And look at them up.
Mhm.
So
Find
the
out what
park board is
Yeah,
discussion.
just Parks and Recreation Advisory Board, and they actually make the decision on whether it's mitigation, or not mitigation, whether they take money in lieu of parkland, or if they take the parkland, or make the recommendation there.
Well, it's
Kinda.
It's at the developer's option.
Yeah.
A developer can offer up land for use by the city as a park, or the developer can offer money in lieu of on-site parkland development.
And you can't make them choose one or the other?
No, the U.S. Supreme Court has said that it is an option, I'm sorry, the Arkansas Supreme Court has
But we
said-
used to try.
We used to, no.
No.
I don't think kids
There have been certain
ever-
situations where we've tried, I believe.
We have encouraged
Yeah.
strongly,
That's a better
money
word
in
than
lieu.
try, I guess.
That's as strong as we can do.
Okay. And but the developer has to do one or the other.
Yes.
They either have to
Uh,
pay or dedicate parkland up to a certain percentage based on what developed.
For
And sometimes it
residential
makes
properties.
sense.
Right, and.
Yeah, so if it's multifamily, they're gonna require more because there are more people in that
Sure.
property. We've got one going to council next, maybe tomorrow. Are y'all meeting tomorrow?
Yep.
Okay. There's one going tomorrow where the developer is offered, parkland property. You know, Parks and Rec kinda wanted the money instead. Understandable, but it's at the developer's option.
Does the developer also get to choose how much they pay?
No, it's set by ordinance, how much per
good.
resident or square foot or unit.
Yeah. Choose how much they pay, $1.
You know, the amount of parkland is also set by ordinance. So it's either a certain amount of parkland dedicated to the city or a certain amount of money.
So sometimes the money is preferable to a dinky park that's not really gonna service anybody,
The money's almost always preferable to the city.
because then you can put the park wherever you want.
Right.
Well, and a lot of times, I mean, we've got so many parks that, you know,
It's more to
if
maintain now.
if it's a small development and they wanna donate a little bit of parkland, we would have like 1,000
Yeah.
parks, you know,
There are
we
those-
can't maintain.
And none of them big enough
Yeah.
to do anything with.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some successful examples in parkland dedication ordinance, like, what's the park on West Fayetteville where the dog park is?
No,
Mhm.
I call it the I'm Star
Bryce
Park.
Davis
Bryce
Park?
Davis.
Yeah, that's a, parkland dedication park from two different developments, you know, putting two pieces of parkland dedication together.
And that happens during a development and subdivision
Yeah,
process.
large scale
with
development.
Roads in and all that, so.
Okay, well, it's getting a little later, so let's, move on to the next agenda item, which is the invasive species. We'd give an update on that one.
Yeah, so I think I mentioned this at the last meeting in March. There's been a lot of interest from the Urban Forestry Advisory Board in invasive species. This committee has had a lot of interest in invasive species. The administration has taken that to heart and is interested in having staff do some work on invasive species policy, looking at developing a potential ordinance to affect, you know, potentially the planting of invasive species, whatever those may be defined as, in the city of Fayetteville. But ahead of moving forward with developing that ordinance language, the administration is bringing forward what we're calling a resolution of intent to City Council on May 5th. And that resolution is going to essentially ask for City Council input on what all should be considered as part of this ordinance development, to try and see what kind of consensus we can get from City Council members around invasive species. Assuming that resolution receives at least 5 votes, then we would move forward with developing a stakeholder group and begin rolling up our shirt sleeves and developing that actual ordinance language and looking at basically 2 broad areas: the limiting the introduction of invasive species into the community, and then also focusing on eradicating and removal of invasive species from
private property, encouraging that as much as possible, providing education and outreach opportunities to private property owners, and then using citizens and staff to actually physically remove invasive species on city-owned property, such as is being done around Lake Fayetteville and on several other city-owned parcels across the city. So, May 5th is that when that city council meeting is scheduled. It's 2 weeks from tomorrow, and I would encourage anyone who's interested in, coming to council and expressing their opinion on invasive species. If anyone's got a particular area of concern related to invasive species that they'd like to speak on,
Are
happy to
you
have you come.
referring to plants, mostly just
Yes,
plants?
plants. I'm sorry, I didn't clarify that, but yes, we're talking primarily about plant species, shrubs, vines, trees, predominantly.
No exotic animals.
Yep.
Well, obviously,
It'll be fun.
many of us have been much concerned for many years. That will be one of those things where you don't want to force people not to have a Japanese honeysuckle vine in your yard or a China honeysuckle bush. Well, we'd like to get them out of town so they would quit spreading. And it would make a world of difference if we could. And one of the Bradford pears are actually calorie pears. They're an invasive, and even the lady who writes for the Gazette about mostly about non-native plants, that are pretty. She came out last weekend, like you saw Janet's article, and so everybody knows we should be doing this, but if you've got a certain bush in your yard you love, you may not, it may be the only thing that's blocking the view of your front door from the street, or something that you'd like it to do, and you got to find something that'll replace it.
I'm wondering how the list gets written. How do we?
Well, there
Well,
are
we've
lists
got
out there
the big
already
list,
of
yeah,
non-natives
there.
and,
But that would presumably be part of the.
Invasive equals non-native, is that?
No, not necessarily, but I mean, there's a lot of,
Primarily, yes.
Yeah, I think that's,
lot of
it's definitely
information
one of
out
the, high pieces of work on the stakeholder, groups, list of to-do lists. Once this, or if this resolution is passed, like what species are we talking about? What species are continuing to be introduced, into our community, in terms of controlling that, that spread of invasive species? What are the ones that are, have the worst kind of ecological impacts, and are most prolific in our community? So it'll certainly be part of that conversation, is what species are we talking about? And I think Aubrey identified a couple, potential, high potential species.
usual suspects.
Yeah, the usual suspects for sure.
I
Yeah, I think
live on a lot where the two spinster ladies that I bought the property from 15 years ago were.
I didn't hear you say that.
They're sisters, they were ladies who had certain things growing there.
Oh, he said sisters.
What did you think I said?
Nothing.
Nothing.
Keep going.
I'll tell you after the meeting.
What did I say?
No, no.
Anyway, they were elderly, and they were in love with exotic honeysuckles. And so I have got honeysuckle that will not quit. It's impossible to get rid of it.
But one thing, Richard, if you've got native honeysuckle, which there is some in your neighborhood, I've got beautiful ones in the yard, but they have little seeds, one flower on the end of the stem. Japanese honeysuckle, everywhere there's a leaf, there's going to be a bunch of flowers and a bunch of seeds. So they produce thousands of seeds where you might get 23 on a similar sized bush.
I just see this conversation as getting really
Yeah,
embroiled.
I'm
in
sorry.
What in the world?
Well, we're for it. Isn't that the consensus that we want?
Well, I think after, this is just gonna go to council to see if
Okay.
council directs, staff to really dig into it. And then I'm sure it'll come back to the Environmental Action Committee for discussion.
I know. Certainly.
So, and then the next thing on the agenda tonight was the, recycle something.
Yeah, just want to remind everyone about the opportunity to provide input as part of the city's recycling master plan. We had a public input session on April 6th, I believe it was, 2 weeks ago today, Monday night at Woodland Junior High School. And that kicked off a survey where we're asking for community input for the future of Fayetteville's recycling and composting and waste diversion program. There's two surveys. If you go to recyclesomething.org, there's actually two surveys. There's a residential survey and a business survey. So if you're a business owner or proprietor in the community, I would invite you to fill out that business survey, but certainly you're all residents, so please fill out that residential survey and spread that on to any of your friends and neighbors in the community. We do plan to bring an update back to you all probably in June or July on the status of the recycling master plan and where it's going, but I can tell you the things that are being talked about right now are doing obviously collecting more of the recyclables that are being generated in our community. We know about 20% of our waste that's going to the landfill is currently recyclable under the city's existing recycling programs, and we're just not capturing that. So we've got about 56% participation from our residents in the city, so we want to up that participation. We want to do a better job capturing the recyclables that are generated in our multifamily housing complexes. Right now our program doesn't do a very good job serving large multifamily complexes. We know we're missing a large portion of our commercial recycling sector. Our program, again, doesn't do a great job offering options to large commercial businesses, so we want to figure out how to capture more of the recyclables that are generated from our commercial businesses in Fayetteville as well. And then we're also interested in taking a look at, once we've done a better job capturing more of those recyclables, we know that food waste and organics constitute a large percentage of the waste that's generated in Fayetteville, and we want to figure out some ways at doing a better job of capturing some of that potential waste that could be diverted and recycled and turned into usable soil matter and fertilizer. So those are the conversations that are being had, and they're all going to be part of the plan going forward. Our consultant out of Tampa, Florida, Kessler Consulting, got a lot of really good input when they were here earlier this month, but again, this survey is going to provide greater opportunities for input and direction on where this thing is headed, so I invite you to please voice your opinion there.
And while we're on the subject of recycling, I talked to Jeff Coles last week. He's over
Recycling trash.
Trash division. And one thing we talked about was not just diversion, because diversion's, well, how you get things from the landfill to be recycled, but contamination, because the more contaminated your diverted products are, the less you get for your commodities. It's all just one big economy. And so he's going to ask the consultants to look at our contamination rates in conjunction with that. I'd like for the Environmental Action Committee to actually study contamination rates. I've asked them to look at, the difference between our two drop-off centers. One's manned more hours than one of the other is. And sometimes trash goes in some of those dumpsters when it's unmanned. And so we're spending man-hours pulling trash out of that. So that means people are getting to throw trash away for free. But there's an educational gap there, too. So I'm asking Kessler Consulting to look into those things, too, because those are some of the questions we're going to be asking at the council level. So I'd really like to see the Environmental Action Committee get involved in this recycle campaign in order to look at that, contamination rate, so that we can actually investigate value and revenue from our commodities that Fayetteville's getting. So I think it'd be something for the EAC to look at. That's something that I think we could be more active in.
So that could be combined with the week that the students move out of town, everybody in the EAC goes out and checks a dumpster, and you may get lucky and
Gets
take
a new microwave.
microwave or a tablet that's only 9 months
A
old, you
refrigerator.
know, bought in September. A refrigerator, those little ones. are-
A refrigerator, yeah, oh, one of those small ones. I was
Oh,
gonna
there are
say,
lots
that
of
might
those
not
out
fit.
there.
Alan, you're talking about contamination of recyclables, right?
Yeah, so when I say that more specifically, you know, we're looking at, you know, Kessler's looking at the entire big picture, the scope of Fayetteville's waste stream. And I want to get a little bit more in depth on the contamination in terms of, so if, you know, they pick up these commodities out of, whether it be a curbside sort bin or whether, you know, there's a dual stream or a single stream, whatever it is, if there's a dirty baby diaper mixed in with the paper product, well, that paper product's really not a valuable commodity anymore. So, you know, or if
The pizza's still in the pizza box.
pizza's still in the pizza box,
That
you know, Fayetteville's one of the only communities that recycles pizza boxes.
Right.
You know,
So that-
Rogers, they don't recycle pizza boxes, Fayetteville does. But then again, we have a large volume of commodity there, so, I just would like us to look at that a little bit more because our contamination rate helps determine our value and the stability of our market.
Well, this is a little bit off the thread of what you're saying, but I would like to think about the rest of the package as well in terms of contamination, specifically, and this is about fluorescent bulbs. Those things just get randomized throughout the rest of the package that's not being addressed by recycling. So there's your food waste, there's your organics, which are contaminated by this indiscriminate discarding of fluorescent bulbs. And it's so nasty because it's these phosphors that are loaded with mercury, and it's all of this really fine, awful, sharp glass. So I think the city might, at some point, figure out that it's worthwhile to intercept those. And it's a big deal, because there's a high premium paid for doing it right for those things.
So you're saying, okay, so right now we have a curbside sort program, and we have two types of containers. We have a container, and we have a fiber container. Now, people don't always sort them out like that, but they can put anything in either one of them if they want to. And then there's these little bags that they can put their paper in and set inside one of the containers.
Yeah.
But you're saying
Well,
something to put fluorescents in?
I think it's gonna have to be more like a place where you can take your fluorescents, if you have the conscience to do it.
Well, have you
Thanks
seen
for
the
the
little
gap.
blue bags that people put paper in?
Well,
That could also be an option too, because those people put their paper in a blue bag or
But
can.
I know Robert's familiar with
I don't know.
Yeah,
our
those-
most of the
opportunities for
fluorescents come
fluorescent
from
recycling.
businesses, large.
right.
Oh, you mean commercial, those big
Four-footers.
tubes?
Those
I thought you
things there.
meant like
Yeah.
little household screw-in
Above us,
fluorescents.
So it's-
Okay.
the sky above us are
It's actually
covering.
illegal for a business to put those in the trash can.
Yeah.
And there's already a huge infrastructure and business and money that goes into recycling those. The problem is with the fluorescents is there's no money to be made off them. You have to pay to get rid of them. For residents in the state of Arkansas, you cannot mandate residents keep things out of landfills. That's simply, when we talk about our state law, and honestly nationally, that's the case.
I'm not
So-
mandating, I'm just giving people an option.
Right, so there is one. Our drop-off location is in South Fayetteville it's right next to the jail. And they take fluorescent bulbs from the public.
Yeah, but it's pricey.
Where do they go?
No,
So they go through a couple of different programs. The county runs that one, and
That's a
they,
hazmat program, right?
well, it's an HHW program, and they just switched to their fluorescent bulbs go-to, which changed the pricing a little bit. People were complaining about pricing, so now it's priced by length. So it's like $1 for the shortest ones. As they get longer, they cost more per bulb. That cost is a direct reflection of the price it costs to get rid of them. So the county makes no money and actually loses money on shipping on that program. So what you're paying is literally to the dime, actually less than the actual cost of getting rid of those fluorescent.
But, I mean, where do they go? I wonder.
Oh, they go to a number of Stericycles, one of the companies that takes them. ESCO processes them. They just move them. They don't express
But
them.
what do they do with them?
So it depends. They crush them in places where they can capture all the vapors. I don't know, and you know more of the market side, I don't know if there's a resale value. I don't believe there's a resale value in anything other than the metal ends. I think everything else is going to be captured for vapor, crushed, and then landfilled. I'm sure that there are some places that use them as road fill, but I highly doubt that that's what ours are turning into. Do you know?
Well, I'll be honest, I'm not sure. I think, like Lamp Tracker, which is a WM company, and full disclosure, I think they say that they recycle everything. So the glass, like I said, it's all crushed in a, vapor type contraption. So they're collecting the traces of mercury, and then the phosphor, whatever powder, and the aluminum ends, and the glass and all that. And so supposedly, they've found a home for all of it. Of course, it's huge volume.
Well, I mean, I'll find out for sure. This is the
But again, it's cost. It's not a
I was going to
not
say,
a value.
recycling, that sounds like it would take more fossil fuels to recycle than.
Oh,
it would
probably,
not.
yeah. I mean,
Way
we've
more,
got one big
It's a
operation
consumer
in
demand
South
issue.
Carolina, I think, and I think there's one other somewhere out west. But
Well,
yeah, that's.
But I can find out those details.
Yeah.
if you just,
And there's others that do.
very quickly, if you wanna think about the item, okay, just look above you, think about if you had all those guys in a pile in front of you, right? They're not broken yet, so everything's okay, kind of. But the angle I'm getting at is, how do you keep people from just throwing them away? You don't do it by charging them $1 a piece, because they're not gonna do it.
But we could subsidize it, but then we're all paying for the people that won't do it.
So I'm trying to develop the reason why the city might be interested in intercepting these things before it gets mixed in with the other parts of the package that they're trying to figure out how to use.
Well, the one thing we can't do is we cannot take any recycling that we don't know where it ends up, at the very far end. That's one thing we cannot do.
Well, and this you
Yeah.
would. I mean, this is already the thing is they're not getting thrown in recycling bins and broken. They're getting thrown in trash cans.
Yeah.
So they're not contaminating our recycling.
No, but my point
But
is,
they're contaminating our
we're
landfill.
looking for how to expand into the rest of the package of,
Mhm.
of the waste,
The whole thing,
which
yeah.
consists of organics, food, et cetera. It's a pretty big part of it, I imagine, don't you think it's 30–40%?
20% is organic.
Yeah, Kessler's,
Yeah, that's
doing, they've already, part of what they talked about at that public meeting was they've done the waste characterization assessment. They took several residential loads and commercial loads and so on and so forth, and they waded through all of it and weighed it, and, I think some of the people on the committee went to that.
Yeah, Richard was there.
Richard? Okay. So
And you
they've
can
got
fill up-
charts and graphs of all that, and, the big picture stuff as we talked about, you got organics is a big picture, and construction demolition debris, and the current recycling, and the recycling we're missing, and on and on and on. But I think, everything's done by weight, and I think, fluorescent bulbs is probably a trace. I don't think it's enough to tip the scale at this point.
It's
Now,
paid
we don't want them in
paid
landfill
by
either,
tonnage,
but,
right?
yeah. it's-
Tonnage for the hauler.
I mean, we don't want them either, but I'm just saying, I think it's.
There's a lot of ways of looking at those, and my way of looking at it is about the contamination aspect.
Yeah.
And that's all. We can,
All right.
I can have a long conversation some other
Yeah.
night.
I'd
No,
love
we
to-
don't
I'd
want
love
all
to.
that stuff in landfill either. There's a lot of things residents, as Rob said, residential customers can throw anything away, and we can't really stop them. But we don't want that stuff in the landfill either. They can throw away some
Well,
nasty
the
stuff.
landfill, just one quick point, the landfill, a classic engineered landfill is a sequestration. It is a place where you put it for eternity.
Right.
So in the landfill, doesn't matter if it's mercury from that point of view.
Well, I mean, it runs the cost up because you got to manage the leachate and all this stuff. And
Depends on the liner they
And
have in that
in theory,
landfill.
over time, lining can be disrupted by.
Well, I mean, if your
Little earthquake.
landfill's doing its job, it's
Right.
sequestered.
right, right. And if it's not, there's
So the argument,
There's been
ways
some
to address
questionable landfills in Arkansas.
oh yeah, well, that's, you're certifying those.
Sorry.
if we're
Well,
interested in
if-
Yeah.
recycling going forward, we could, I mean, honestly, this is what I do for a living, so I'd be more than happy to give a presentation explaining the percentages and the breakdowns and what.
I think it would be good, and I didn't mean to get that going off too big. I just, if when they give their recycling plan update, to us in June or July, do you think Jeff Coles, is he already planning on coming? Probably.
To this committee meeting, I
Yeah.
haven't specifically talked to him about it, but that's what I had in mind.
Yeah.
Is Jeff or Brian or maybe myself does an update.
It'd be great if Robin Reed could come too. She's very, very informative.
Boston Mountain.
Oh,
Yeah, with
Rob,
Bos-
yeah,
Boston
sure, Rob.
Mountain.
Yeah.
Rob's boss.
I was-
Yeah.
Our consultant's name's Robin Mitchell, so sue me for a leak.
So Alan, quickly, you mentioned Sierra Club. Wednesday night this week, there's a public gathering of Sierra Club at Frank Sharp's downhill building at
Yep.
6 o'clock. But there'll be a chance to have a little guided walk up on top of the mountain. If you haven't seen all of it or hadn't seen it in a couple of years, since we had a EAC gathering out there 3 years ago or so. The other thing is, if we end this meeting before 8 o'clock, it'll fit in a 2.5-hour slot. I'm very concerned with our public television and our government channel, and so just when you go over that 15-minute mark, it costs another 15 minutes that they can't utilize properly. It's hard to schedule.
So, good point, because we have we have 4 minutes and 5 seconds left, and we have one more announcement, and Peter, if you wanted
I'll
to.
be quick, we did start late, so I think we have a little bit of leeway there, but I just wanted to let everybody know that the city is hosting an Earth Day event on Wednesday, which is Earth Day. We're doing a trash cleanup and wildflower seed spreading event along Fayetteville's trail system. There's going to be a mayoral Earth Day proclamation at 12:45 at the Mary Norton Recycling Drop-Off Center on North Street. And then everyone who's there will get an assignment as to where to go on the trail and pick up trash and litter. And everybody who participates can get a free water bottle and also a free bag of wildflower seeds to take home and plant in your yard if you so choose. So mark your calendar for Wednesday afternoon, Earth Day, and come out and join us. It should be a really fun event.
Great.
Sounds good.
Right.
All right. Well, we will go ahead and adjourn the meeting and see you guys and girls next month.